Hi, everybody. My name is Charlotte. I'm an intermediate artist and a teacher in training at Concordia University. If anybody's having any issues hearing me or anything, just let me know. I'm having a bit of an echo. Okay, it's gone. Good. And I used to work at the Technology Sandbox at Concordia. Some of you may have been there at some point. And I worked as a technician there for about a year and a half. It was a work-study job, so that the time where I qualified as work-study has ended. I had hoped to be a volunteer in the fall, but looks like that's not going to be so possible right now. We're still not totally sure when the sandbox is going to be reopening to the public, but definitely not in the fall, but hopefully sometime next year. So this is me. This is a work that I worked on with Ali Abbas. He was the first workshop host. So I actually made this work on my own at first, but then he came in and helped me out with it. I'll talk more about my work a little later on if people are interested. And let me just see, are there questions still going on? Because in the file, is it already ready? Well, you should be able to open the zip and then be able to drag it into your applications and open it up. If anyone else is able to help them out, let me know. Let them know. All right, so let's get right into talking about coding in the arts. So one thing that I wanted to start talking about is sort of what era of art are we in right now? I think it's really important to sort of understand why movements and eras happen in the art world. People have this sort of reaction to contemporary art and modern art as if it seems random, it seems pointless. What is art for art's sake? Why is this? But the reality is everything comes from somewhere, right? Of course, like anything, there's an evolution. We start somewhere and then it grows and it changes. So I won't go too deep into a history, but I just want to start essentially that in the mid 1800s, this is when we start seeing artists reject the work that was happening before them. So before this movement, realism, which you may recognize this painting in the mid 1800s started, art was commissioned by churches, it was commissioned by royalty. This was considered blasphemous. Why would you paint normal everyday people? And then we started sort of moving on to, well, what about the ways that we portray things? We don't just see things exactly as they are. We also see things with a certain feeling or impression. That's where Impressionism came from, Expressionism came from. And then we also had other people saying, well, what about the things we don't see? There's dreams, there's the subconscious, there's our dark other ego, alter egos, and all of that. So we had surrealism. And then in the mid 20th century, we started seeing modernism emerge, which was all about minimalism, sort of getting down to the basics of what things were really, and then also what art was. And this was all about innovation and pushing forward and advancement, but simplicity as well. And then after the 1950s, really, and starting in like the 1960s and 70s, we started to have art like pop art and performance art that was all about rejecting everything about modernism. So, we don't need to care about the advancements. We need to care about exploration and the human experience and all these things. And this is when art starts to get really weird. So just to look at sort of 20th century postmodernism versus the kind of quote unquote postmodernism that we're in now, I would even call it postmodernism if you want to get really pretentious. But in the 20th century, postmodernism was all about critiquing modernism, as I said, and now it's a lot more about critiquing visual culture. So visual culture is everything in our culture, in our world that is visual. So media, advertisements, television, art, fashion, everything. And now we're really hyper aware of this this interaction that we have with the visuals in our world, right? So now art is all about critiquing how we see and the ways that we're able to sort of comment on that and explore that. And in the 20th century, it was more about concern for accessibility. So where is art? Is it in the gallery? No, we should move it outside of the gallery, outside of the museum. And now we're even pushing it further, and we're interested in open source, which is, a term that you're probably familiar with, especially in the tech world. But this is also something that's really important in the art world, especially when it comes to involving technology. And then there's globalization, of course, which is a huge factor in this, because with the internet, now we have access to art from all over the world, and we're able to collaborate on art across the world. And whereas in the 20th century, there was a concern with performance art, so no longer was art just about medium on surfaces or sculptures. It was about experiences that were ephemeral and just happening in the moment, and then passing and moving on. And now it's about this idea of relational and participatory art. So, what if the viewer were to actually have a participatory part in creating the art? So, their interaction with it. So, this is interactive art. That becomes a huge part of how that art is then perceived by the public. And of course, there's this concept of interdisciplinary, which you've probably heard all the time. It's a really popular term in college and university. And now we have intermedia, which honestly, I used to always get so confused about what is really the difference between intermedia, multimedia, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, you'll even hear. I mean, they're all related and connected, but I find intermedia is essentially like the splicing of the interdisciplinary and multimedia. So you're taking different mediums from different disciplines and bringing them together. So not just different mediums in one discipline, but you're taking painting and dance and technology, and you're sort of mixing all these different things together. So please feel free at any time to ask any questions. You can always ask questions on the workshop thread. If I don't catch them, feel free to open your mic and go ahead and ask. I will sort of check in after each section and make sure everybody's feeling like they understand what's going on. But I'll continue for now, and feel free to pipe up whenever you want. So in the late 70s, early 80s, and especially with the popularity of the at-home computer, or not even popularity, but accessibility, we had this movement, subculture called demo scene, which was happening mostly in Eastern Europe at first, but then it started to, it now is across the globe. This is actually an image from 2017. But what it was that these kids were figuring out ways to crack software open and code into that software all these different really trippy visuals. And they were calling them demos. And then they would share them. Usually at that time, I mean, you had to have them on a floppy disk, right? So people were organizing these big meetups, which were essentially like a hackathon, where people would come together and share these demos to show, like, look at this awesome code that I was able to write. And it was all about pushing the limits and seeing how far you could push those visuals, how far you could, push an animation or create a game that was like totally mind-blowing for what was already accessible at that time. But this movement has continued, and what's really cool is that even though it was like a subculture, it was actually kind of like the graffiti crews of the internet, or not the internet, but of technology at that time. What's really cool is that this is really what pushed gaming graphics to be at the point that they are now. So a lot of the people who were really at the top of their game in the demo scene are now the people who are at the top of the game in gaming graphics. It's so this is just an example of sort of what a demo scene looks like now. I mean, this is 3 years ago, 2017, so of course already, it's dated. But this is just somebody literally showing off, look what I can do with lighting, look what I can do with surfaces, with physics, and then sort of showing, I can implement this into a game now, and then that code gets shared, and people are able to build on it and continue that sort of trend. So I thought that was a really cool thing to share. Just not a lot of people know about it, but this is one of the early intersections of actual computer coding and art, but it's in this very subculture kind of, screw the system kind of way. And then in the dot-com era, so sort of the 90s, early 2000s, you had artists um, learning how to use HTML to be able to show their artwork. But then they also started getting creative with it and creating art that was literally hosted online. This I just wanted to share. This is from 2012, so it's not exactly from the 90s, but these artists they're actually a group, and they were working in the 90s. So this is using Google Maps, and I just thought it was kind of cool. Like, they coded into Google Maps to create these really crazy visuals. So you sort of watch the map go haywire, and it's a whole commentary. Of course, you have to have a certain understanding of the language of art to get what is the point of this. But it's a cool sort of look at the ways that artists were exploring different ways of integrating code, even though they're not making like a beautiful art piece. They're making something that's making a statement about the things that we interact with on a daily basis. And then I wanted to talk about making and makerspaces. So this is really a popular concept now. If you're in high school or SAJA, people might have a makerspace in your school, or you might have one that you go to, or you might have a robotics class or something like that, right? And I sort of made up this definition because when you look up making online, you're not going to find much. You have to look up makerspaces, and then it's going to speak specifically about those spaces. But sort of, I sat down and thought about what exactly is making. So I came up with this idea that it's basically about using complex processes in a really exploratory way to create something that is usually new or innovative. So it could even be an invention, but it could also just be a really exploratory process. So it's really just about creating something to sort of figure out how to use that process, whether it be a programming language, whether it be a sewing machine, whether it be an Arduino, whether it be laser cutting, etc. Even Lego. You'll have Lego kits at Makerspaces because you can make some really crazy, complicated stuff. And I included some examples here that you might not expect. So weaving, sewing, even knitting, crochet, because you can actually make super mathematical things out of crochet, right? But weaving is an interesting one because in truth, weaving is actually one of the oldest forms of textile making, possibly the oldest, because it's so simple in a sense. You could build a frame for a loom, or for a table loom, with household items and make fabric at home. But it also gets incredibly complicated. So in 1805, this man named Jacquard made the Jacquard loom, and he implemented using punch cards. And the punch cards told the warps, so the vertical threads that go here, how to change at certain intervals in really complex ways so you could make very durable and very complicated patterns. And this was an improvement on before. You were using just petals, or you would even have, like in the 1700s, apparently, in some of these factories, you'd even have little children sitting inside here, and this person's telling them, okay, now move these warps this way, et cetera, et cetera. But these punch cards, the crazy thing is these actually became the first punch cards that were used in the very first computers. Computational machines, rather. They were first used by mathematicians and statisticians. There was a statistician who used it to create the census. I mean, it's just crazy. Like, we don't even credit this often with anything, but the Jacquard loom has persisted as well. And now there are Jacquard looms that have, of course, actual computers that are inputted and thousands of warps. And they're creating some of the craziest fabrics and tapestries. So this is actually an artist at Concordia. She was actually a teacher of mine. I forgot when I looked her up at first, and then I remembered. So, I mean, this is something that was made on a jacquard loom at Concordia. There's just so much. You could never, ever do this by hand with a regular or even like a standing loom. So it's a very cool sort of example of how past technology has made its way into new technology, and then, or rather, past sort of methodology in the arts has made its way into new technology, and then sort of circled back. So I'll pause for a second. I'm just going to drink some water, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to either unmute yourself or type into the workshop. If you're not understanding anything I'm talking about, I can always circle back, but we'll continue on in a minute.
Hey Charlotte, small question.
Hey, Ali.
Hey, Ali. Hey. Actually, I'm gonna hold off this question till the end. I just want to know, like, for aspiring artists out there, what would be a good place to like start showcasing their skills? Just curious. You might go over this later. I'm just thought of it.
Yeah, for sure. I will definitely touch on some of that later. Good place to showcase their skills. So an artist that already is involved in like using coding, or just aspiring artists in general?
Aspiring artists in general, what's a good first step for them in terms of getting started in the arts through technology? What's a great place for them to like start doing stuff,
Yeah, for sure. Well, I will show a site called openprocessing.org later that is really, really cool. But I think I will wait until we get to processing so you can sort of make that connection. That's one thing that is interesting in terms of people who are already using coding in their work. But for aspiring artists in any medium, I mean, of course, social media is a great way to sort of start off. DeviantArt still exists, all these different sort of platforms. I mean, it's also a question that I'm always trying to figure out, There's one avenue is to go to art school and network and work with people and make your presence known. But that's one path. Other paths, like, I guess I'd sort of, right now, to keep it simple, I'd say there's the path of really diving into like the academic art world and going to school for it and being really proactive with networking with people. And then there's the other side, which is you don't really have to do that. If you're a real hustler, get yourself on social media and network that way. That's not my preferred method, honestly, but it's absolutely, I mean, it's incredible what you can do these days. And then there's, just Google artist websites. I'll include a list of resources towards the end. But I think I did include some information about, actually, let me check. Yeah, right here. I have this article, I believe, in my list of resources, but I'll just show you quickly. As it takes a long time. So this talks about some history, but it also, go away. Here's DeviantArt today. And this timeline's nice. So Wet Canvas is a great place for resources. DeviantArt exists still, and Tumblr, of course. I don't know if Tumblr is still something people really use. Maybe this had less than I thought in it, but it's definitely worth a read because it will sort of give you a perspective of how things have evolved and where it has ended up now. I just want to see if towards like 2020, what information they have. No, okay. But it's definitely worth a read because it'll give you sort of a sense of like how we've gotten to where we are now. And there are some other resources in there. And then just Googling different like good art sites to sell your work also is a great way to just sort of see how art is shown these days. Are there any other questions? And let me know, Ali, if that wasn't comprehensive enough. All right. So moving on to how coding and the arts are interacting today. So more specifically about, where we see coding and art. I think it's important to understand that, it's coding and art is not just this new phenomenon, but nonetheless, we are here today. So, of course, there is the element of design, and in design, you have 3D modeling. So I have a couple open source programs here. We have OpenSCAD for those who really prefer to work with coding. It has its own programming language that's really easy to learn, and you just straight up create shapes through code, and it's really cool because you live get to sort of see what you're doing. It can take a while to render, but you can make really specific, exact shapes. And if you're creating a prototype or something, this is a great resource. And then we have Blender, which is more of sort of a visual media creation platform or whatever application, and it is actually used in CGI graphics in a lot of films and everything today. It's very, very extensive, um, and it's also free and open source, and that is pretty amazing. So I highly recommend it. You can use it. It's super versatile. You can use it for just 3D modeling. You can use it for animation. You can use it for all kinds of stuff. You can go super artistic with it. You can also, I believe, you can go ahead. You can like go in and code in it. I mean, it's open source, so yeah. And then you can upload this, stuff that you create in Blender into Unity, and you can make a really cool site. Jake the doggo said, "What? Do you want to specify?" While they're typing, I'll keep going. It's okay. And then 3D printing, of course, allows us to do prototyping. So some people have a sort of sense that 3D printing is this magical, amazing thing that's going to change the world, and we're going to see everything is 3D printed. That's not true. 3D printing is really something that it's very cool what the possibilities are with it, but where it's at right now, at least, really, it's best for something like prototyping or one-offs. And then you probably will want to make a mold out of that and have it cast and have it, made in a factory or something if you want to mass produce. So I'll just check out. What is the minimum RAM to run these software properly? Not a question that I'm so great at answering. Ali or anybody else, do you have an idea for something like Blender? I know that OpenSCAD I've run on a really
So generally, from what I've
small
seen from
computer.
Blender, it can go anywhere from like a tiny little or a normal notebook to a pretty powerful machine with like 6 GPUs all working together.
Mhm.
What sort of so it sort of just comes down to what type of projects you're working on, and overall, if you are going to go into arts and stuff, I do suggest that you end up going with a computer. It could be a laptop or a desktop. Whatever you prefer, desktop better. You would usually yield much more performance because it's unlimited. Running on an AMD system, that would generally lead you to having much more powerful and working much better. But it's sort of like one of those things where like the base is sort of like ill-defined, but like the ceiling is just really, really high. So it sort of just comes down to your
Yeah.
budget. Yeah. So, because I have seen people like run massive computations on their uh, machines. RAM is just one thing that you would have to look into it. I would say like 8 GB is usually good for most stuff, but maybe a little bit more would also be better. It comes down to a couple of different things. Does that answer your question, Jake the doggo?
I'm gonna guess so. So yeah, I've run OpenSCAD and Blender actually on like a really, actually maybe not Blender, but OpenSCAD on like essentially like a Chromebook. Um, Blender I've run on a pretty good laptop, not like the most powerful, but that's true. I've seen people spend hours rendering on like an incredibly powerful gaming like desktop computer. So it all depends on what you're creating. And you can always sort of work on something and then transfer it over to a higher power computer when you have the ability. So yeah, like I was saying about 3D printing, it's all about, you can make really cool things. There's a lot of cool art happening with 3D printing as well. People making all kinds of chainmail, people making all kinds of stuff. But it's best for prototyping if you're looking into using a 3D printer for creating products. And then, of course, another part of design is web design. And you've had this real evolution of web design. Now we have user interface, and then that's sort of evolved into user experience. But I thought this was interesting. It's sort of saying that there's actually still a distinction between the two. My dad's actually an expert user experience engineer. What do you call that? Designer. But at the same time, he doesn't even do coding. So he's basically like the architect, and then he works with the I forget the name of that. But the front end developer, yeah, he works with the front end developer to sort of create his vision. But nonetheless, you could be a user experience expert and work on creating really complicated interactive design. And what did I want to say about that? And that essentially it's I'm so sorry, I just blinked. But yeah, the difference being that graphic design used to be very sort of click and point and create these templates, but now graphic design can be extremely immersive. Oh yeah, so I wanted to say that if you're a really talented user experience designer, then you're able to create a website that the person goes to that website and immediately knows how to use it, how to navigate it. It's often really sort of they're a very uncelebrated people, I think, because their work, I mean, the same as developers and programmers, of course, your work is taken for granted, right? And now in the sort of artistic sense, you can get really, really artistic with it and create these really beautiful things, beautiful design. And I'll say, like, a lot of people, artists sort of have ended up being so immersed in web design and user experience because there's such a deep amount of a knowledge you can acquire there, that they maybe don't even create visual art anymore, but they still consider themselves an artist. And then there's the tangible side of design, which would be fashion and architecture. So this is these are a couple examples of how coding is now being used to create pieces of wearable art. This one is pretty cool. When you look at it, it moves allegedly in response to the viewer's eye movements or eye tracking. It's not something I find particularly, appealing to wear, but it's really cool where this sort of technology, where this innovation has taken volume. Where it has taken textiles and what this could mean for the future of textiles. It's especially in fashion. I'm sure people may know this, but at the same time, I do hear a lot of people often question why is fashion so weird when it's on the runway. It's all about pushing everything to its extreme limit, just like those programmers in the demo scene. They were pushing their graphics to the absolute limit to understand how far they could take it. But because they did that, they were innovating in ways that led to really complex graphic visuals that then created these incredibly immersive games. It's the same in fashion. People are creating these really bizarre things that are not something you would want to wear. But what does this mean for where we could push our, fashion innovation on the more mainstream level? And this is looking back at Concordia. I may not talk about them, but there's this group called the Milieu, and they're a graduate space in the actually here I'll just click in Concordia. So if you were to go to Concordia or anywhere really, and then if you were to go to Concordia for graduate school, you would, as an artist or as a programmer, engineer, even scientist, you could get involved in the Milieu, and they're all about granting research funds for people to do really cool projects that push the limits of technology and art. There are different groupings, clusters is what they call them, and they have all these different ones. I won't go over all of them, but I was just looking at Textiles and Materiality to show. So this is actually the Jacquard loom. So you can basically put a photograph into this loom and it'll weave that photograph for you. But you can also do very artistic stuff. And then they've created, they've created all kinds of cool things. This is a duo of jackets that when two people are both wearing the jackets and then hold hands, the LED lights start to make sentences. It's pretentious, but it's really it's interesting, and it definitely makes a comment about like commentary about connection and feeling connected to people. All right, so moving on to architecture, another tangible aspect of design. Um, Nowadays, apparently, while architects tend to sort of leave the more technological, scientific aspects of building to the engineers, apparently nowadays more and more architects are starting to become interested in using programming and coding to do different sort of experiments with how they might approach their design. So this is just one example of that, called generative design. So this is a school that they were asked to redesign in a more efficient way. So what they did was they mapped the movements of ants. I don't fully understand, exactly how that worked out, but they mapped the movements of ants to figure out how to make the most efficient path to this number of different rooms. And this was sort of what they came up with. I believe it was actually built too. So it was really innovative way of designing something totally new and unseen before. But that wouldn't have been possible if they hadn't sort of looked into doing coding. So yeah, I'll leave that there. I have that article in the resource list that I have. It's really interesting. If you're interested in architecture, I highly recommend checking that out. And then we have interactivity. So in the visual arts, if you want to create an artwork that is an installation, or, well, we'll stick to installation, but it could also be something else like online. But for now, installation, you might want to use a microcontroller. So that could be a Raspberry Pi, an Arduino. You guys probably know what those are, but if not, I also included links in the resource list for that. If you, I'm not sure exactly how it works, but they're giving away a circuit playground, which is this guy right here. I also included a link in in the giveaways thread, showing off what a circuit playground is capable of doing. So it has all kinds of sensors, which is really cool. So you have your LEDs, you have your capacitive touch here, which you could connect to wires or to even to conductive thread that you would sew into something. You've got a light sensor, you've got a little speaker, you've got an audio sensor, temperature sensor, touch sensor, tilt sensor, everything is in there. It's not the most powerful thing in the world, but you can do some pretty cool, fun stuff with that. And if you've never heard of Adafruit, I'll just show it to you quickly. It's not the best place to buy from. Black Lives Matter. And it's because it's pretty expensive. But when you go to learn, they've got all kinds of tutorials. And you can learn how to do all kinds of stuff. So you could just go and be like, all right, I want to do a fun project with my Arduino today. And you could go and find, you could even search, I'm sure, Arduino tutorial or something. Maybe projects. Maybe not, but you can find all kinds of projects that they have here. I've used Adafruit a lot for trying to just figure out some like debugging, and then also using inspiration for, like, sometimes I'll want to make something light up in a certain way, and then I'll just come and check out their NeoPixel tutorial, and it'll help me sort of figure out, okay, I was missing this aspect, or I'll get inspired and say, hey, I can do this really cool project for fun. So they're also in the resource list. And then we have a new sort of thing, which is art being hosted fully online. I mean, it's not new per se, more and more new. So not just somebody putting their art online for people to see it, but the actual website itself is a piece of art. So this is something this woman, not the woman in the painting, but the woman who created it, she, this is literal pure code. So sorry, I know I move my mouse around a lot. Um, she just coded this painting, and she just did it to see if she could, and it's really quite cool. But then when you load the link into different browsers, the way that that browser reads that code has an effect on the image. So this is an older browser. This is another browser. This is for Chrome. My default browser is Safari. It's pretty much the same and a little bit different. But I thought that was really cool, and I think I think people should be doing a lot more stuff like that. So there's just a couple strange anomalies that happen. The eyes get super weird, and this happens here. So yeah, I mean, I thought that was really cool. I also included her GitHub with all the code there. And then somebody's pinning a message. Is that something I should worry about? That's okay. Public art is also something that we're seeing more and more integration of technology and programming into. This is Soleil de Minuit. It's at Place d'Armes Metro in Montreal. If you've ever been there in the past 3 years, you probably saw it or didn't even notice it. It's not the most um, noticeable artwork, but it's actually really cool. What he did, Adrian Luca, he's from Brussels. He was commissioned to do this work in Montreal, so he recorded the light of the sunrise in Brussels because it's sunrise there on the first day of summer at midnight in Montreal. Anyway, not important. With a spectrophotometer or spectrophotometer, not sure how to say it, and then went took every single pixel, went and worked with a stained glass workshop, and with that spectrophotometer matched the exact color of every pixel, and then created the sunrise in Montreal. And then of course we have VR. Oh, I also recommend checking Adrian Luca out. He's got all kinds of different projects. Again, they're not most like beautiful, but they're very interesting, which is what you start to see with, you're merging technology and art in this way these days, where it's all about sort of seeing what's possible. All right, and then we have VR, which of course nowadays you have these online virtual galleries, and you can go and see famous art, or you can see individuals posting their art in these gallery spaces. And this is a platform where you can go and show your art. So actually, there's an answer also to your question, Ali. This is a cool way to sort of show your art. You can go and log in and create a space, I believe. I've never done it, but that could be pretty cool. Um, and then I just included this. I participated in a virtual reality um, artwork that a friend of mine was making, and this is using just tilt brush. We created these environments that then we had people come and visit. So these huge environments that you can walk through and explore. I would love to do a lot more of this stuff in the future. It's a pretty cool way to experiment. There's no programming involved in this. We did want to eventually um, use Unity to import data from like a heart sensor. And eventually, my real interest is to import data from brainwaves. I think that would be really cool. Oh, is Zcoder the only one not able to see the slides? hopefully you're able to come back and find it. Let me know if anybody else is having that issue. Jake the doggo. You haven't seen them at all? All right. Okay, guys. If there's all right. So hopefully you'll be able to come back, but so long as it's not everybody. All right. So I'll keep going. Sorry about that. And you also have augmented reality now, which people may have seen this. It went pretty viral, but it's pretty cool. This sort of semi-anonymous duo created this artwork called Mirages and Miracles. And when you put your phone up or your iPad up to the artwork itself, and this is a virtual reality aspect of it, but all of a sudden there would be an animation that would be interacting with the artwork. So it's cool because you know normally you go into a gallery space, you feel kind of you feel like you're disrespecting the work if you're pulling your phone out and taking pictures, but now you're encouraged in that you have to experience the art through your phone. So I thought that was pretty cool. And it was really beautifully done as well. You know, it wasn't just like, look at this thing that we kind of figured out how to do and it doesn't look so great. It actually was incredibly beautiful. So if you have time, definitely go. If you haven't seen it, go look up the videos because it's really quite cool. And then we have the concept of generative art, which if the first thing you thought of when you heard the term coding in the arts was deep dream generator, don't worry. I think that's pretty common. It's it's very very cool what the deep dream generator is able to do, and it's using neural networks and working with um, sort of predictive patterning and everything. I don't really know exactly the terminology or language there. It's not something that I'm particularly interested in, but I think it's really really cool. Um, but I sort of when I did more research about what generative art was, I learned um, that really what generative art means is the artist is sort of taking away a part of the control. So or rather, giving up part of the control. So they will create the system or the structure for the art to occur, but then they'll allow something else. Doesn't have to be a computer. They'll allow something else to create the artwork with them. So I immediately thought of this artist who's a Canadian artist named Agnetha Dyke, and she literally just works with bees, which is really cool. It's maybe not to everyone's aesthetic taste, but it's just a very interesting sort of way of art making where she literally doesn't even make most of the art. Um, and then this is just an icon from Lillian Schwartz, who is sort of considered one of the first artists to create generative art with a computer in the 1960s. She had artwork in the MoMA that was made with the collaboration of computer coding. And then, of course, we have that deep dream generator now, which is all about art that basically makes itself. And again, there's a cool link here that is all about the history of generative art. They go really deep, and they even mention cave paintings being being considered generative art. So it's really anything where you're taking away your control a bit and allowing something else to engage in that art making process. So if there are any questions, I'll leave a minute for people to type them, or feel free to open your microphone. Where I think we're doing good on time. Yeah, okay. I've just got like a maybe 10 minutes to go over the next few things, so I'll just leave 1 minute. Or if there was anything that was not clear, can always go back. But we can move on, and feel free to pipe up if there's anything. So now I just wanted to talk a bit about sort of intermedia collaboration, meaning, how do you get involved in creating intermedia art if you're not an artist, or if you're not a coder, or if you feel a bit intimidated by technology, but you really want to implement technology in your art. Um, and also, I just also want to point out that if by chance there's some engineers on here or hackers on here that um, not interested in the arts so much. I hope maybe I've shown to you the way that art and technology really do intermix, and it's actually um, quite important that they continue to do so. So, one thing you can do, of course, is consider an intermediate degree. So, IMCA at Concordia is Intermedia and Cyber Arts, IMCA. They are a lot more on the sort of artistic end of the spectrum of art and technology. A lot of the IMCA students I've met don't even learn how to code or anything, but they use like projections and maybe uh, electronic components without actually using a computer. So they'll actually do hard electronic hacking or whatever and involve it in their artwork and robotics and things like that. But you can also get into coding. So it's a pretty open degree that has all kinds of really cool classes that you can take. And then you're also encouraged, and I think you have to take some pure arts classes, so ceramics, fibers, painting, drawing, photography, print media, sculpture. So it's a bit more of on the artistic side, but it's still really cool if you are artistic and interested in integrating different forms of technology and electronics. It's definitely cool to look into that. And then there's computation arts, which is more on the side of learning how to do game design and development, how to create interactivity, um, whether that's for something more artistic or something more on the side of technology, um, and also working with sensors and physical computing, um, and then also getting into social media and new media theory, which is kind of this intermedia concept about uh, how technology is evolving into this more artistic sense. If like right now I have all these alerts on my email from LinkedIn for artist jobs, right? And I always get, they want artists for game design. So the term artist is now becoming co-opted by the technology, by the world of technology. And just to show you that there's some really cool labs that you would have access to if you were to go to Concordia and become and pursue a fine arts degree. So both of these are BFAs, so Bachelors of Fine Arts. Um, but still, again, computation arts, I is probably on the less artistic side of that. I believe it's also BFA. Could be wrong, but I believe it is. And you have access to, this is a wood shop. You have access to the Digifab lab where they have a laser cutter, a resin 3D printer, um, scanners, like 3D scanners, and also the metal shop. So you can learn how to weld and create metal components for larger sculptures or for larger electronic parts. And then also, it's important to get, well, not important, it's one way is to get involved in local makerspaces and hackerspaces. Um, the only official makerspace that is open to the public that I've found is in Montreal, at least, is the Helios Makerspace. I know some of you may be from Ontario, so definitely check out, look up your town or Ottawa and see, or Ontario, or sorry, Toronto, and see what makerspaces you guys have there. And then, of course, there's hackerspaces. I won't say which one this is. I don't know how much they like being promoted, but they're pretty easy to find if you look up Montreal hackerspaces. And school labs and workshops. So Technology Sandbox, where I used to work, this is a picture there. It's really sad that we're not going to be open for a while because the space is just a great space to go um, and explore. And you don't have to be there doing anything specific. You can just go and talk to people to learn about what they're doing. You can go with a project that you need help on, and somebody will help you figure out how to start on it. So just to say, like, the difference between the DigiFab, which is a really cool space, and like I said, they have some really amazing technology there, equipment there, laser cutter, 3D scanner, etc. You have to go there with a specific project and a specific thing that you need done, and you have to be a fine arts student as well, and then you have to pay for materials. The sandbox is totally free. We don't have you pay for anything. We have equipment that we loan out. Um, I'm talking like I still work there. My heart is still there, but um, they have all kinds of cool stuff that you can loan out, and then also just the space itself is all about exploring, learning. You can go and just sit with someone and learn all about Linux, or you can learn all about robotics. You can just tinker with stuff. Uh, you could have someone explain trigonometry to you. I don't know. You could do so much there. And then there's also the fourth space, which is pretty cool. I don't know a ton about it firsthand, but from what I've sort of gathered, it's cool. And they have, let me see, yeah. Oh, it went away, I think. Oh no, it's here. Work with us. You can go here. So I included this link because it's not the most obvious link to find. But you don't have to be a student, I don't think, and you can just propose a project that you would like to show, and then I think it can be even in progress, and you can get some exposure that way. You can go check out some of their past programming to sort of understand the kind of stuff that they take on. Things like there was a map here. Oh, nah, it's not as clear as I thought it would be. But like they took over the whole space, and there were all these maps that were up that were interactive, but also were mapping something about like queer spaces in Montreal. All right, won't spend too much time on that. And I just want to say that there's these two ways of getting involved in working in technology, really, or in the arts, and especially when combining art and coding. You can go top down, where you shoot for the moon. You have a huge idea. You think about, I want to create this space where you walk in and, your heart rate instantly is red, and I don't know, whatever. You can go crazy and really have these high expectations and sort of see how far you can get to that by reaching out to people in things like makerspaces, hackerspaces, in your school, online. There's so many ways that you can reach out, and then see how far you can get through creating that. I definitely did that with Ali, with the work that I did. It was very top down. I spent when I first started that project, it was these paintings that had this projection on them that then had an interactive element related to motion detection. I went and Googled like crazy and tried to. I'd never done any coding, and I tried to figure out how to write this script. So I had this crazy long script that was so messy, and it barely worked. And then Ali came in and helped me clean it up, and it was like, I don't even remember how many lines of code, but maybe 20 or something. It was compared to several hundred before. But then there's also a way of working which is bottom up. So just understand the components, read that whole book on the tutorial book for Arduino. Watch every coding trained tutorial online, or just really learn about electronics and just learn about how resistors work, and then create something with that and see where you can go with that. There was a cool class, an IMCA class, that Intermedia and Cyber Arts class in Concordia, that they had a guest teacher at one point who was having the students work fully bottom up. So she was just teaching them about electronic components, and then they had to make art pieces that were fully conceived through that work. So you sort of figure out how to use this sensor. Now make an artwork that is all about that sensor. And it was really cool what people were able to do. Excuse me. So I just wanted to say that, um, well, I'm sharing this quote from Paul Graham. It's from 2003, but it still is very true. And I have that link in the resources as well. It's basically an essay. And he was a painter who turned hacker. So he wrote about all about how hackers and painters have a lot in common. So he said what they have in common is they're both makers, along with composers, architects, and writers. What hackers and painters are trying to do is make good things. They're not doing research per se, though if in the course of trying to make good things they discover some new technique, so much the better. So I really like this because, it's not that they're sitting down and doing the research. They're exploring, they're feeling things out, and they're seeing what happens. And they're trying to do it in a way where they're stumbling on some sort of innovation. And I think that's really important because at the end of the day, art allows for innovation and insight in technology, and technology allows for innovation and insight in art. So I think that was kind of my main point of this whole presentation. I hope it was communicated well. Um, there's so much to talk about when it comes to coding in the arts, and as I'm sure you could tell, I'm definitely no expert programmer, but I do have a real fondness for art and technology. So I really appreciate you guys allowing me to do that today. I will now open up my processing tab. So I meant to remind everybody, I only reminded, I think, a few people, but if you want to go ahead to the workshop thread, I can put it back at the bottom. I think it's going to try to pull up a new window, so let me just... do this here. If anyone has any questions, please feel free. And go ahead and download processing. It's quite light, it's quite quick to download and load up. If anybody wants me to wait a minute, just tell me now. If not, I'm going to start going with my tutorial. What I wanted to do is show just a really simple sort of tutorial about how processing works. Some of you may be way farther advanced than this and find this kind of pedestrian, but if you've never used processing, it's a cool language because it allows you to immediately see what you're doing. So let me just remove all the distractions. Oh, and this is that resource link that I wanted to share. Yeah, keeps doing that to me. So you have all kinds of stuff in there. Too much stuff in there. But I mean, I wanted to share it because essentially, let's say you have to write a paper on something related. I've done some of the work for you. You have a whole list of articles here, all about clothing and coding, intermedia, the history of the jacquard loom, rise and fall of internet art communities, art in the 21st century. So there's all kinds of stuff. Artists that use art and technology. Also, here are some books. Oh, I forgot to include in there. That is by the guy who does Coding Train. I know Steven knows it. Nature of Code. And all kinds of stuff in there that you can check out. If there's anything you want more information on, it's there. Because I know I touched on a lot of sort of random stuff today. And let's clear this out. Oh, did I not send it? Of course. Copy. There you go. I know. Not much, not much. All right. Da, 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 da. 8:30. So we got half an hour. Alrighty. Let me keep my phone open here in case anybody has anything to ask. Feel free. I know it may be. I mean, maybe everything I shared today was quite obvious, or you already knew a lot about it. But one thing I find as an artist, sort of dipping my toes into the art world or the tech world, it can feel really intimidating. It can feel like all your questions are dumb. None of your questions are dumb. I know you hear that all the time, but you know, we all know what we know and what we're able to sort of bring to the table. And it's really easy to sort of forget that other people also have. Realizing I'm like showing all my desktop here. Other people have their own sort of experiences that might make them come off as intimidating or like they know more than you. But at the end of the day, they got there in their own way. So processing. What's cool about processing is right away you have a window. I can just do this for now. And this is your run button. So it runs whatever code it is. This button, oh, and of course it's going to do that. Never mind. So it has a default size, a default color for the background. And it went away. Forgive me. All right. So let's say I want to change the size. I can just say size. I want it to be 500 pixels by 500 pixels, semicolon, run. Change the size. Great. Now I want to change that color. To change the background color, you say background. 255 is white. 0 is black. I'll get into color a little later. And what's cool is you can also just do, Control R or Command R to run it, but you can also do Shift Control R, and now it's going to run just that window. Am I still sharing? Yeah, I believe so. Okay, if I'm not, don't be shy and let me know. All right, so let's see. Great, thank you. But in processing, like most coding languages, you're going to want to have a certain flow. So in order to have that flow happen, you do void, setup, close, open and close parentheses, no semicolon, open curly brackets, close curly brackets, and then void, draw, same. So your setup is something that's going to occur once. Your draw is going to continuously occur over and over and over again. So if I put a rectangle so the way that you place your objects, this is an object, is you do x-axis, so whatever, 100, 100, 100, 100. Semicolon. Now when I run it, I have a white rectangle with a black black stroke. If I want to change the color, I have to say fill, and I have to say it ahead of time. So I want to change it to black. I have a black square, but I actually still have a black stroke. Yes, thank you, Ali. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense, Stella. I'm not totally like understanding why it just means okay, it returns nothing, but it's a function or a part of your flow. So this doesn't need to be filled, right? So for whatever reason, that's how that works. And I have Ali here to help me answer answer the more technical questions, which I really, really appreciate. Thank you, Ali. I'll keep going. If anyone wants me to slow down, just say, hey, slow down, or repeat that. So if we change the color with fill, if we want to have no stroke, it's literally no stroke. You won't even notice it because it was black on black. If you wanted to change the stroke, it's lowercase, I believe, and you would just put, so I'll show you. This would be a gray. It's not easy to see, but there should be sort of a very thin gray stroke there. But I'm going to put no stroke. So this is how you write no stroke. And if ever you have a question about a function, about an object, if it's a different color, then you're able to right-click it or and find it in the reference page on processing. You can also go straight into reference, and this is where you'll find, so if you're trying to figure out how to do something, you can kind of go through here, get a sense of where you want to look. You can find a texture, different attributes, environmental things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and try those out and see what you can come up with. You can also go in, click it, and figure out how to use it a bit more with an example. All right, so let's say I want this rectangle to move. One thing I can do right away that's pretty cool, I can say move with my mouse. Now, everywhere my mouse goes, the rectangle goes. All right, and I'm going to make this a bit bigger. Yeah. All right, so you can sort of see, and now it's moving around. That's cool. Maybe I don't want it to move around though. Maybe, or not with my mouse. Maybe I want it to move fully on its own. How would I do that? So I have to choose sort of on one axis. Okay, let's say I'm just going to say it's going to be at 400 pixels. And then I'm going to have this X. But the X, I need that X to do something. So I'm going to create a variable. And I can use the variable, I can use the function or term float, float X. And I want to put that X at, do I want to put it at a spot right now? Maybe not for now. Actually, yeah, I think so. And then, so float X. Are people doing okay? How do we make it only put a rectangle when the user clicks? Yeah, I'm sure there's a way to do that. There's all kinds of things that I wouldn't have the answer to because I kind of just figured out how to do all the different sort of functions that I'm using today. But I totally suggest going ahead and looking into those different tutorials. Yeah, there you go. There's all kinds of cool ways to play around with it. Awesome. Let me just check something. So if we want it to move, what we need to do is in this draw function, we need to say, all right, make X move a number of pixels every time the page refreshes. So I think this should work. Yeah. So every time it refreshes, it moves five pixels to the right because it's +5. So if it was -5, it would move to the left, I believe. So it would be from 400 pixels to the left. But then we lose it, right? So if I want it to bounce back, I have to say if, I have to use an if function. So if X is greater than, I could say 800, but I'm actually going to just say width. That way, if I change my size, it will change with it. If X is greater than width, then curly brackets. But now my problem is I don't know how to do that, right? Because I can't, this I need to change. So this is my speed. So I'm going to make a new variable called x speed. X speed. Right? Oh, yeah. So we're going to make that 5. Sorry, guys. You can see I'm figuring it out as I go too. So now instead of saying 5, I'm going to say x speed, and I could change x speed up here anytime. So if x is greater than the width, and I'm going to check on you guys. Okay. Then x speed, so make x speed is basically what this says. Reverse. We reverse by doing times -1. Close curly brackets. So I'm sure you guys already know this if you've gotten this far through the Learnathon, but your syntax is really important. If you're having error messages, the console's pretty, or or the error box is pretty clear. It'll tell you, you're missing a maybe you're missing a semicolon, etc. But if you're having a weird one that you can't figure out, definitely try to make sure you've got all your semicolons in the right place, your curly brackets in the right place, etc., etc. And let's try to run that. And of course, it's all black, so it's hard to see, but it actually just went off the page. So let me change. I don't like my rectangle. I'm going to change it to a circle. And now that it's a circle, I only need one argument because it's just the diameter, or one integer or whatever. And I'm also going to change my fill. So now let's talk about colors a little bit. You may already know this. Hopefully somebody doesn't know this, and this will be worth hearing. All right, oh, sorry guys, I missed your messages. Wait, how you do the star? Oh, yeah. Yeah, sorry guys, I'll increase. And I don't know if I can really though. I mean, I can go full screen like this. And that might be all I can do. Is that a little better? File preferences, font size. See if that's too big. No, you're kidding. Oops. That should have worked, right? Oh no, editor, my bad. All right, it's quite big, but I'll just go down a little bit. Sorry for the boring interlude here. All right, so color. Let's talk a bit about color real quick. We only have 15 minutes. So color in digital is RGB. There's other ways to do it as well, but RGB is not so different than red, yellow, blue, if you know anything about mixing paint. So it's actually red, green, blue, as opposed to red, yellow, blue, which might be a little confusing if you're sort of if you're understanding, red and yellow or orange, but what would red and green be? Weirdly enough, it's actually yellow, red and green. But it works with the properties of light, so it's different from your sort of tangible mixing of pigments with paint. But if you understand red, yellow, blue well enough, it's not that hard to use RGB. Essentially, you have 3 arguments. Or I don't know if I'm using the word argument right, but you have 3 values. Yeah, I don't think it's argument. It'd be 3 values. At 255, they are full. So this is full red, full green, full blue, which with the properties of light, that becomes white. When you change them all to 0, it's black. You have a shortcut, just 0 is black, just 255 is white. And also, if you do just a single number in between 0 and 255, what do you think it would be? Gray. Because any equal amount, which of course this keeps happening, so 50, 50, 50, it's, half each, or not half each, but 50 of each, and then all those together becomes gray. So any number, single number between 0 and 255 will make something in the grayscale. But when you start combining variations of these, then you start getting colors. So made a green. Very nice. If I escape, it doesn't go back. Man, that's too bad. I'll go back like this since my font is larger. Let me know if anyone wants me to increase it again. And so I just wanted to make my color different so I could see it. But something cool you can also do is use the function random, which literally randomizes it just for that red value. Didn't work. What did I do? Should have changed. Fill, random. Interesting. Can I save it? It's not going to work, I'm sure. Well, that's strange. It should be sort of flashing each time it loads a different value, but all the way up to 50. Maybe because, it's because the green is all full. My bad. Yeah, so because the green was full, I believe, I had a reaction. So now you can sort of see it moving, right? You can see its path. And if it were to come back, you would see it again, but it went away. So now we need to say if it's greater than the width, but also random x also works, right? I mean, if I literally put x, like put this anywhere, let's see. Oops, sorry, I may have, oh no. Yeah, so it randomly places it. You can use random really anywhere. Not anywhere, of course, but anywhere that makes sense. So there's all kinds of really cool ways that you can explore these different functions. I'm giving you such a basic sort of view today, but I totally recommend going to the processing tutorial page, which is in that thing. So this is how you say or. And if x is greater than width, or if x is less than 0, spaces aren't important, but I like them, do the same thing. So even when we get back to 0, when we multiply the next integer by -1, it reverses. So instead of being a negative number, then it will be a positive number. Is circle a new function? So circle is an object. You could also actually have ellipse, which would then allow you to change, instead of having 100 as the diameter, I could create 100, 100, and it would still be exactly the same. And let's see if it worked. Yay, now it's going back and forth. Did that make sense, Stella? Yeah, okay. Can or replace the 2 bars? I don't think so. I believe you really need to use the 2 bars. We can try. Yeah, because it doesn't light up, that means it's not recognized. It's just going to be confused. And I don't think capitalizing. Yeah, so my understanding is you have to use this for or. There may be other ways to do it as well. But this is kind of boring, right? It's just like going back and forth, back and forth. Maybe I want to now have it move around the y-axis as well. So we'll literally just do the same thing. And this is the nice thing about programming, is all I have to do is go through and change all these x's to y's. I'll do the same thing with my definition and my if statement. Y, 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 Y. Sorry, I will stop saying Y over and over and over again. And now when I run it, it goes back and forth. And it goes off the page. If I was in a classroom, I would ask you to guess why, but I won't waste too much time because this here should be changed to height. And now bounces around the boundaries of my window. And you can change all kinds of things in there. You can change your speed, you can change the original position. Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's cool because you get to see what you're doing immediately, right? So we could then add a new object. Okay, I just like clean this. I'm going to change the color. This time I want to make it a solid purple. So full red, no green, full blue. It's actually going to be fuchsia. And I want to have an interactive thing going on again. Mouse X. And I'm going to make it a lot smaller. Maybe really small. Not really small, but much smaller. And I think I did all I need to do to now have something interacting. So this could be cool. You could involve, this in an artwork and an installation and have, instead of it being the mouse location, it could be connected to input from a microcontroller that's connected to a sensor that's reading people's patterns and changing the color and all kinds of things you could do with this. This is really the extent of what I wanted to show you guys today. We could keep going, adding new objects, playing around with the color, playing around with texture, all kinds of things. But since we only have 7 minutes left, I wanted to open the floor up to questions as well, whether they be technical or not. Feel free. Did anyone was anyone not able to get this far? Does anyone need to see my code? Sure, absolutely. So yeah, let me also show you guys. Open processing. You can join. It's something that teachers use apparently. I learned that today. I didn't even know. But people upload their sketches, and there's some really, really cool stuff in here. I am in love with this. I love the way that paint drips and moves around. That project that I worked on with Ali was involving projection of paint moving and like sort of moving in water and stuff. So I saw this and got all excited, like, oh my God. And then I can go and see his code and I can play around with it. I copy it, put it into my processing application and change everything I want to change. But also this way I can learn about, okay, how he created this flow, how he created this script, the different functions he used, the different, all kinds of different things. And then of course, yeah, the particle system, yeah, that was one of them. All kinds of cool stuff, man. I love particle systems. There's this VR application called Cosmic Sugar that I know Ali knows. I love it, man. It's something like this. It's even cooler. But you're in VR and you're just kind of throwing sugar around that then has this whole like way that it moves physically by itself. It's too cool. its own physics. I love it. I love it, love it. But the thing about stuff like this with processing, I mean, you don't have to just make art that's cool looking. You could do really crazy data visualizations. You know, those data visualizations that were made for COVID-19 spread, you know, absolutely could have been made on processing. Well, I hope that this was an informative um, workshop. I hope that you learned something about processing today that maybe you didn't know before, or something about coding. Um, and I definitely hope that you guys learned something about the ways that art and coding can interact. Feel free to go ahead and use that document that I shared. There's all kinds of resources there. I probably forgot to even mention. There is something called DevArt, which I think is hosted by Google, and it's all about art and code. So if you have a project that you've made involving art and code, is this the right place? This doesn't look like the right place. Mm, 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 mm. So I have it here in competitions, grants. Yeah, DevArt with Google. And you have to use a specific Google technology, I believe, but like Go or Dart or other things as well. But you can see some really cool examples of technology and art that have already been made. And you can get a grant through them, I believe, for your work. So definitely check that out if you're already in the art world and the coding world. And in the future, if you do get into it, I hope that somebody today will consider sort of pursuing an intermediate degree or working more closely with a hackerspace or makerspace. And I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you so, so, so much for participating today. I guess you guys all have the chance to win that circuit playground, which is really, really fun to play with. And yeah,